as to the exact meaning of a sin. The Greek word in the New Testament for a sin is amatanin, and that means to miss the point, or as in archery, to miss the mark. And therefore, from the Mosaic Ten Commandments comes the idea that it is a sin, that is to say, a missing of the point, to substitute an idol for God. Now, the picture I just showed you, as I said, is an idol. But those primitive Mexicans, even they don't seriously confuse that particular image with God. The danger of it is, of course, is they may think of God as something like that in their mind's eye. They may think of God in the form of man. But the images that have been made of God or of the gods out of wood and stone and in painting have never really been taken seriously as actually what God is like, and nobody has confused the actual image, say, of a Buddha, such as you saw at the beginning of this program. Buddha is of course never identified with a god, because Buddha is a human being. But these images are never seriously confused with what they represent, any more than a Catholic confuses a crucifix with Jesus Christ. So the images that are pictures, statues, and so forth, are not really very dangerous. The dangerous images of God are those that we make not out of wood and stone, but out of ideas and concepts. You see, an idea is abstract. So St. Thomas Aquinas, for example, defined God as necessary being. He who is necessarily. Now that is a philosophical concept. God is being. But that concept is an idol, because it confuses God with an idea, and because an idea is abstract, it seems something very much more spiritual than an image made of wood or stone. And that's just precisely where it becomes deceptive. Likewise, many people think that the Bible is the authentic Word of God, and therefore they worship the Bible and make it into an idol, disregarding the ironical remark of Jesus to his contemporary Jews, "You search the Scriptures daily, for in them you think you have life." And as St. Paul said later, the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. And so whatever you put as an image or an idea in the place of God necessarily falsifies God. Now, a lot of people say, I don't think I could face in life. I don't think I could face life unless I could believe in a just and loving God. It strikes me that that kind of belief in God is actually a lack of faith. You see, the word belief in Anglo-Saxon comes from this Anglo-Saxon root leaf. I would as lief. And leaf means to wish. So belief really means a strong wish. When you get up and say the creed, I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth and of all things visible and invisible, you are really saying, I fervently wish that there exists a God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, etc. Because if you really have faith, you don't need belief. Because faith is an entirely different attitude from belief. Faith is a state of openness or trust. To have faith is, for example, like when you swim, you trust yourself to the water. You don't grab hold of the water when you swim. And if you go stiff and tight in the water and try to catch hold of it, you'll sink. You have to relax. So in the same way, when a cat falls off a tree, the cat doesn't go stiff all over in a state of tension, that is to say, a state of holding on. The cat relaxes. It falls heavily, thumps the ground with its tail, and isn't hurt because it relaxed. So the attitude of faith is the very opposite of clinging, of holding on. So that you could say that a person who is a fanatic in religion, who simply has to believe in certain propositions about the nature of God and the nature of the universe, is a person who has no faith at all, because he's holding on tight. And so when we sing hymns like Rock of Ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee, these aren't hymns of faith. Or even Luther made such a thing about faith. But he wrote a hymn in German, Ein fester Burg ist unser Gott, a mighty fortress is our God. That's not a hymn of faith. A person of faith doesn't need a fortress. He's not on the defensive, and so in the same way, when churches are designed like the royal courts of kings, you know, in the royal court, the king sits with his back to the wall, which is the position, or used to be the position, of the altar. And around him he would have his courtiers and guards. And their place, of course, in the church design called a basilica, which means the court of a basileus, a king. The bishop sits at the back in his throne, and all his attendant clergy stand around him like his guards in a royal court. Well, why is this? A king stands with his back to the wall because he rules by force. And when his subjects and his courtiers approach him, they prostrate themselves, they kneel down. Why? Because that's a difficult position from which to start a fight. And so, are we projecting the image of a frightened king upon the ground of being the Godhead? We are, you see. Or in a Protestant church, the furniture all looks like a courthouse. The minister wears a black gown, and it's the same black gown as is worn by a judge. And there are pews and pulpits and all the familiar wooden boxes of court furniture. And the minister, like the judge, throws the book at you. He preaches the law laid down in that other idol of God, the Bible. But does God need all that? I mean, is God somebody who takes this aggressive attitude, either of the king in the court where all the subjects must prostrate, or of the judge who bangs the gavel and says, "Baw, baw, 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 baw"? Well, this is ridiculous. And a God so conceived is an idol and manifests the absence of faith of all those who worship him, because they have no attitude of trust. They cling on to these rules, to these conceptions, and have no fundamental give to life. Now, in a certain way, you might say that a good scientist has more faith than a religious person. Because a good scientist says, I want to find out what is the case. My mind is open to the truth, whatever that truth may turn out to be. I have no preconceptions. I may have some hypotheses. I may have some notions in my mind as to what the truth might be, but I'm going to test it. And the test is, I will open all my senses to reality and find out what that reality is. But then again, the scientist runs into a problem, because he knows that whatever comes to him as reality depends on the structure of his instruments and the structure of his senses, and behind the structure of his senses, the structure of his brain. And that's himself. So he has to have, back of all that, an act of faith in his own brain, an act of faith in himself that his physical organism, or his mind, or whatever you want to call it, is indeed reliable and will show him reality, truth, what is. So unless there is a basic and primordial act of faith in yourself, And you can't ultimately check on yourself. You have to believe your senses. You have to believe your reason, your logic, your intelligence. So you have to have faith in that, even though you can't check it. I mean, it's not like your mind's a radio and you can go in and screw in a connection here and fix up another connection there, and so be quite sure. You always have to trust. And behind all that, you see, behind the brain, just as I've shown you before, behind your eyes, there's the blank space, the unknown, the unseen. And therefore one could say that the highest image of God, which is the unseen behind the eyes, the intangible and invisible, which is space, out of which come all the stars, we can say, yes, that is God. But we have no image of that. We do not know what that is. But we have to trust it. There's no alternative. There's no way out. You can't help trusting it. You've got to. But you see, that trust in a God whom one cannot conceive in any way is a far higher form of faith than fervent clinging to a God of whom you have a definite conception. And that conception can easily be wrong, and even if it's right, clinging to it would be the wrong attitude, because when you love someone very much, you shouldn't cling to them. I don't want to hug my wife so tightly that I strangle her, and mothers shouldn't love their children so much that they strangle them by smother love. It comes out in the story in the New Testament when Mary Magdalene, who loved Jesus very much, she's said to have seen him after his resurrection. And she immediately ran to cling to him. And he said, "Do not cling to me." It's translated in the King James Bible, "do not touch me." But the Greek word, haptin, means to cling to. Don't cling to me. Don't cling to anything of the Spirit. It's just like don't cling to water, because the more you grab it, the faster it'll slip through your fingers. Don't cling to your breath. If I breathe in and hold it and say, "Oh, I got this breath now, I better hang on to it because breath is life," I'm going to go purple in the face and strangle. You have to let it go. You let your breath out. That's the act of faith, to breathe out. It'll come back. Actually, the Buddhist word nirvana means breathe out, because letting go is the fundamental attitude of faith. Now, it isn't as if Christians hadn't been aware of this. One of the most fundamental source books of Christian spirituality was written, somewhere in the 5th century, maybe the 6th century, by a Syrian monk who gave himself the name Dionysius. I've recently translated this book. It's called Theologia Mystica, Mystical Theology. And you can get it from your paperback bookstore. This book is a very strange document because it explains that the highest knowledge of God is through what he calls in Greek agnosia, which means unknowing. He says that one knows God most profoundly and most truly in not knowing God. That means, just in the same way as your sight comes out of an unseen, so when you know that you don't know, you really know. And you really know because knowing that you don't know is a state of mind in which you have let go of your efforts to grasp hold of life with your intellect. We have a saying in Latin, ex nihilo nihil fit, which means that out of nothing comes nothing. You can't, in other words, get something out of nothing. And it's occurred to me that this is a fallacy of tremendous proportions that lies at the root of all our common sense, not only in the West, but in many parts of the East as well. Because what has struck me is that nothing, the negative, the empty, is exceedingly powerful. I would say, not ex nihilo nihil fit, out of nothing comes nothing, but I would say you can't have something without nothing. We all know that energy is always vibration, pulsation. Whether it be the energy of light or the energy of sound, it's always on and off. So that all wave motion, then, is this process. And it's curious, isn't it, when we think of waves and talk about waves, we think about the crests. We think about this point. And we say, that is waves. And that is because the crests stand out from the underlying uniform bed of water, which is relatively solid in comparison with the space above, so that these crests are perceived as the things, the forms, the waves. But to have sound, you must have the alternation of sound, silence, sound, silence, sound, silence. And so you get that which you can hear on a very deep note. Now, the same thing is true of all life together. We shouldn't really contrast existence with non-existence, because actually existence is the alternation of to be and not to be, of positive and negative, of on and off. So you could say existence is eternal, if we are to consider existence as this alternation of now you see it, now you don't, now you see it, now you don't, now you see it, now you don't. It is that contrast that presents the sensation of there being anything at all. Now, in light and sound, these waves are extraordinarily rapid so that we don't hear the interval between them. But there are other circumstances in which the waves are extraordinarily slow, as in the alternation of day and night, light and darkness, and the much vaster alternations of life and death, of the great slow cycles of the world. But these alternations are just as necessary to the being of the universe as in the very fast motions where we get it in light and in sound and in the sense of solid contact, where it's going so rapidly that we notice the continuity, or the is side, and we ignore the intervention of the isn't side. But it's there just the same, just as there are vast spaces within the very heart of the atom. You know, too, how smells are so powerful in evoking memories. Something you smelled as a child. Say, the smell of fresh coffee being cooked early in the morning, or bacon frying, or leaves being burned on an autumn day. All these things evoke very vivid emotions and feelings of our childhood in the past. But you know, when people talk about very deep things, they never talk about the sense of smell. They talk about touch, vision, and even taste and hearing. For example, we hear about the vision of God. In the Catholic Church, it is said that the highest thing to which man can attain, or to which the angels can attain, is the beatific vision, to see God. And the prophets would hear the word of the Lord. And in one of the Psalms it says, "Oh, taste and see how excellent the Lord is." Taste and see. But no one ever had the idea of smelling God, of having not just the beatific vision, but the beatific smell. This has never been brought out. And yet, curiously enough, throughout the whole history of religions, until we got to what is called the phenomenon of the Protestant nose, we've had incense. Hindus use incense, Buddhists use incense, Mohammedans use incense, Catholics use incense. But there came a break at the time of the Reformation.